Welcome, all of you, to a debate about the future of rooftop solar in California. What's quite possibly the most polarized, strident, and meaningful state-level clean energy debate happening in the country today. I'm Jeff St. John, Director of News and Special Projects at Canary Media. We're a nonprofit news outlet that launched last year to cover the transition to clean energy. You can find us at canarymedia.com. Last month, the California Public Utilities Commission issued its proposed decision for replacing the net metering structure that's governed the value of rooftop solar in the state for more than 20 years, with a very different structure that would significantly alter the economics of customer-owned solar systems. As you all know, it's a very complicated proposal, but we can summarize its three main changes. First, it would reduce how much money is paid for rooftop solar energy exported to the grid. Second, it would impose a monthly fee on rooftop solar owners based on the size of their solar systems, a fee that's higher than any similar fee elsewhere in the country. And third, it would create various credits to ease the financial impact of these changes for a few years, and offer various incentives to encourage adding batteries to solar systems and to boost the value of solar for lower income customers. So, what should California do about rooftop solar? I'm pleased to be joined today by two gentlemen who are among the most knowledgeable we could hope to find on the subject, even if they may disagree on what the right course of action is. First, we have Severin Borenstein. Severin is a professor at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business and faculty director of the Energy Institute at Haas. And he has published extensively on electricity markets and renewable energy and advised agencies on energy and climate policy, including the California Energy Commission. He's on the board of the California Independent System Operator. Thank you for joining us, Severin.
Thank you.
And second, we have Ahmad Faruqui. Ahmad is an energy economist who works on rate design and energy efficiency issues. He advises clients around the world and has co-authored numerous papers and books on electricity pricing and other topics. And he comes to you today as a resident of the state of California and an EV driver. Thank you, Ahmed.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, both of our panelists will be getting into the complexities of the CPUC's proposed decision in much greater detail. And it's also important to note that amid the firestorm surrounding this decision, California is fully committed to decarbonization, and this net metering debate is part of a broader debate over how best to achieve that goal. Now, we're not taking audience questions or comments during this debate, but we certainly encourage you to tweet about it. Use the hashtag #CanaryDebate, that's one word, or tag us at Canary Media Inc. And we certainly welcome your feedback after the event. So, Ahmed and Severin, we're going to ask you a set of questions you both agreed to, with each of you having 3 minutes apiece to present your answer, and then a 1 minute period apiece for each of you to respond to what the other has said. So without further ado, let's begin. Our first question is, can you summarize your views of the proposed decision and essentially tell us which parts of it you support, which parts you oppose, and which parts you think ought to be changed? Ahmed, would you like to begin?
Thank you. First of all, let me wish my Indian friends Happy Republic Day. May the sun continue to shine on India. I'm going to share my personal views about the proposed decision. They do not reflect the views of any client, because I have none, or those of any employer, because I have none. So with that, let me say that I was really surprised at this decision when it came out. It seemed to really be one of a kind. I had never seen anything like this in any states in the US where I have worked, like the 24 states, or the 20 countries where I have worked as well in my career. In many ways, what I was expecting was that you recall that on March 15th of last year, the various parties presented their ideas. And I thought what the commission is going to do in the proposed decision is tread the middle ground, not mirror the views of a few of those parties who had given their proposals to us on what I'm going to call the Ides of March. There are some features that I like about the proposed decision, and let me comment on those. I believe the time has come to end net metering and to move to net billing. Imports should be priced separately from exports. I also support the need to pair batteries with solar panels. I also support the need for lowering export compensation. Finally, I support the notion of allowing solar panels to be oversized to allow for electrification of homes and vehicles. However, I don't support the notion of imposing a grid access charge. It is totally at odds with California's solar mandate for new homes. An average solar customer today has 7 kW in their panels, and they pay $57 a month. The solar tax will double their monthly bill and stretch the payback period to something like 20 years. Who will install solar with that payback period? And without solar, who will install batteries? I do support gradually lowering the price of exports, but not by 80%. And I don't support applying these charges retroactively to 15 years from the time the system was installed. That retroactive change has never been seen anywhere else, and it's way too drastic. So that's sort of my summation. I find things that are attractive, in particular net billing, I think is the way to go. But the way they're proposing to make those changes is very, very dramatic, very, very drastic, and totally opposed to California's goals.
Thank you, Ahmed. Severin.
Thanks. First of all, I have to say I am on the board of governors of the California Independent System Operator, but nothing I say today reflects their views. I'm presenting my personal views. I want to thank Jeff and Canary Media for hosting the discussion and Ahmad for joining. And I also want to say that I hope that this discussion will help turn down the temperature a little bit on this whole issue. There's been a lot of vitriol. After 4 years of Trump, I have to say that I really think it's important to distinguish between people who share the basic goal of fighting climate change, but may differ on the means, and people who don't. So having said that, let me start by saying that I think there are two different issues that get mixed together here. One is what role should rooftop solar play in a decarbonized grid? But I think that's largely separate from the question of is the current compensation for rooftop solar in California appropriate? So I'm happy to talk about both of them, and I suspect we are going to get into both of them, but I think we should primarily focus on the second. So I would, when we talk about this second issue, we're really looking at the payment that rooftop solar households get versus the value they bring to the grid. And my view is that, like all renewables, rooftop solar should be compensated at the full value it brings to the grid. Now, that's not just the electricity. That is the avoided investments in distribution and transmission. That is the avoided environmental impact to the extent that additional rooftop solar avoids running fossil fuel plants. Now, we can get into how much it does that, and I would argue that when you put all that together, and have put out research saying this, that when you put that all together, the value of rooftop solar is well below 10 cents a kilowatt hour. In contrast, NEM, net energy metering, is rewarding rooftop solar in PG&E territory around 26 cents a kilowatt hour. So that gap is a huge gap, and I think it's really inappropriate. So your question was, what do you support? And I'm already running out of time. I do support reducing the export price. I would support moving it to avoided cost. The monthly grid charge is a ham-handed way of trying to make up for the cost shift from the part that isn't exported. I will get into this, but I'd prefer other approaches. The phase-in is political, and I think that that's what you have to do. And finally, I think that the emphasis on pairing with battery storage and grid connection is really good.
Thank you, Severin. Ahmed, do you have a response?
Yes, I do. I'm really very encouraged by Severin's answer there. We may end the debate at this point, but no, we can't. We can't. There are a few nuances. So I totally agree that the export price should not be the retail rate. It should be something approximating the value of solar. And we can have discussions on whether it's 10 cents or 5 cents. It's certainly not 30 cents or 26 cents. I think we are both on the same page there. The question is how quickly to do it and how to gradually bring it about, and whether or not to do it retroactively to the customers who sign on, thinking that they would be on solar with a certain arrangement for 20 years as opposed to the 15 the proposed decision is talking about. I do have some thoughts on how to deal with the cost shift on the import side of the equation, but let me save that for a subsequent question.
Very good. And Severin, your thoughts?
Yeah, Ahmad raised the issue of the retroactive change to 15 years. And, there are two sides of a coin here. On the one hand, we are going to cut off, under the proposed decision, cut off customers who have who have had solar for a while. On the other hand, we aren't going to immediately change the compensation for going forward. We are going to phase in this compensation. I would gladly, and maybe Ahmad and I can reach an agreement, say that we extend the compensation for people who have already put in solar, but we shorten the runway for implementing this for new solar. I understand the commitment argument of people who have already put in solar, though they have fully recouped their investment at this point. But I don't see the argument for saying what will lead to a gold rush, of course, of people going forward, getting to put it in the next couple of years and get the full benefit.
Well, let's turn to the issue of the cost shift for a moment for our second question. Severin, I know that you've argued that paying the full retail rate for rooftop solar that's exported to the grid constitutes a significant cost shift. That cost shift is, the cost borne not by rooftop solar owners, but by people who don't have solar on their roofs. And Ahmed, you've issued a fairly extensive critique of the cost shift argument. Can you both summarize your positions for us? And Severin, may I ask you to begin?
Yeah, so let me fill in on the argument that the point I made, that the price people are paying is about 26 cents a kilowatt hour. I'll just use PG&E. And avoided cost is below 10 cents. What's in that difference? Well, what's in that difference is all of the fixed costs that are in our volumetric rates, the subsidies for low income, the subsidies for rooftop solar, energy efficiency program, vegetation management, which is, of course, we are ramping up with all the wildfire issues, wildfire liabilities, grid hardening, early investments in nascent renewables, these are all great ideas, and just the fixed costs of transmission and distribution. All of that is not avoided when somebody puts in their rooftop solar. So when they stop paying for it, somebody else has to, and those costs get shifted on to other customers. But what our research showed is essentially you can think of that as a tax on the consumption of electricity to pay for all these non-marginal costs. And what we've shown is that is a very, very regressive tax. It is more regressive when you look at who's paying for it, the income levels of people paying for it. It is more regressive than a gas tax. It is more regressive than a sales tax, and it is far, far more regressive than an income tax. So essentially, we have taken the most regressive tax possible in order to finance this. Now, some people argue, well, that's not, somehow the utilities are going to pay for it. And I know there's a big piece of this that's hating on the utilities and particularly hating on PG&E. And I am not going to disagree with that. But that's not who's going to end up paying for this. Who's going to end up paying for this is the ratepayers. We know that. And it gets shifted to other ratepayers. And it's a big cost shift. I think an estimate these days that's reasonable is about $3 billion a year that's being moved on to other ratepayers. And essentially, that's a $3 billion a year tax. and it is the most regressive way we could collect that money.
Ahmed.
Yes. So what I'm going to do is try to put the cost shift in perspective. Great design is driven with cost shifts, particularly for residential customers. Let me give you just a few examples. Large customers subsidize small customers. Customers with central air conditioning systems subsidize those without central air conditioning. Urban customers subsidize rural customers. California spends $1.5 billion a year on energy efficiency. Some customers avail themselves of this subsidy, and some get thousands of dollars to do a whole house upgrade. They're being subsidized by other customers who are not availing themselves of energy efficiency funding. And then, of course, comes the cost shift that energy efficiency induces once the energy efficient customers have lowered their consumption. Some are lowering it dramatically, like 20, 30, even 50%. And then, of course, there is this care rate that we have in California, where low-income customers get a break of 35% on their monthly electric bill. Who do you think is paying that cost shift? It's all of the other customers. Which cost shift is good? Which cost shift is bad? That's an ethical question. I'm not going to get into that. I do realize, as I mentioned earlier, that NEM 2.0 also creates a cost shift. So my solution is, let's institute a minimum bill of, let's say, $35 a month, which, by the way, right now is $10 a month for solar customers, and move all new solar customers to a sharply differentiated time varying rate, preferably with a dynamic element to promote load flexibility. I see no reason at all to institute a grid access charge. It is, as Severin put it, ham-fisted, is discriminatory. It has no cost basis. After all, customers who have solar are customers like any other customer. Why should we do something differently for them on the consumption side? Let's focus on the export side. Yes, they're also producers, so let's price their product based on the value that solar provides to society as a whole.
Very good. Thank you. For our responses, I thought I'd inject a quick addendum to the agenda and see if you all could help me understand why it is that there is so much dispute over what the cost shift of net metering is today and what variables are at issue in that dispute. I hope that's not too much of a push for a minute-long response, but if you have any thoughts, Severin, can you help us understand that?
You got to give me more than a minute there. So there isn't that much dispute, I think, among most people who are taking this seriously and not just talking about freedom or something, but who really are saying, well, what is the difference? There is some difference of opinion about what the marginal cost saved is, what the avoided cost is, but it's not that large. And I haven't seen anybody come up with a number that's anywhere near 26 cents a kilowatt hour as the avoided cost. But there's always going to be a difference of how much transmission and distribution it saves, what's the, et cetera. I do want to address the cost shift issue and that there are lots of cost shifts, which there are. But this one's different. First, the wealthier, this is a cost shift that is clearly from wealthier individuals, from poorer individuals to wealthier individuals. And just overwhelmingly, less so than maybe a few years ago, but still overwhelmingly. And second, people don't choose to be poor or don't choose to live in rural areas in response to incentives from electricity rates. People are choosing to install solar in response to these incentives. So it is the cost shift that is driving a lot of the solar installation. So it's not just an ethical issue. It actually is an efficiency issue when we offer subsidies that are being paid by other people, and it results in people taking an action that really isn't the cost-effective way to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you for sharing so much in such a short amount of time. Ahmed, what are your thoughts?
I will make one comment, trying to catch up on time, which is that a lot of these solar customers usually are larger customers who have overpaid for their fixed costs over decades, not just years, but decades. Nobody cared for them their bills went through the roof. Every time PG&E has a rate case, I mean, my rates have gone up by 12% in just 10 months, and more is expected, $5 billion, then $11 billion, then perhaps $20 billion. That is just staggering. That is the biggest cost shift from the customers to the utility shareholders. That's the one I am really concerned about.
Excellent. Now, I think we have been discussing cost shifts, perhaps somewhat in historical terms. I guess we should probably shift the questioning toward kind of how the decisions being made today will affect things well into the future. Sammy Roth, a reporter with the LA Times, has covered this issue quite well and has described a, quote, stark philosophical divide between the two sides of the net metering debate, a divide over the best way to build solar as fast as possible to combat climate change, and, I should note, how to allow that solar to serve the grid not only when the sun is shining, but when it isn't. In simple terms, one side sees distributed solar and batteries as the better way, I think, and a growing private sector market to deliver distributed solar batteries as a critical piece of successfully meeting the challenge of climate change. And the other side, if you will, sees utility scale solar and energy storage as the better way. It's far more cost effective on straight, cents per kWh terms, and thus the area where public policy and private capital should be directed. What do you both make of this divide? What do you both see as the proper balance that we should seek to achieve between these two in terms of the fastest, most cost-effective, and perhaps most equitable way to build out solar capacity? Ahmed, if I may start with you.
Well, okay, so I do believe there is a very sharp philosophical divide, but unfortunately, it is not just philosophical, it is also ideological now. It's very difficult to move people from the position that they have locked themselves into. It's very unfortunate, but what I'm seeing more and more is people who are investing in solar are being vilified and demonized as being wealthy, stealing money from the poor. I don't think that is anyone's intention. At least I don't know of anyone. So what we have is one side is only supporting the installation of large-scale solar and the associated transmission lines. Why is that? Well, because that generates profits and goes in the rate base. We are told that large-scale solar costs just 3 pennies a kilowatt hour. So what good is that for customers paying 30 cents a kilowatt hour? Also, how does large-scale solar provide resilience to the customer? I installed solar panels and paired them with a battery in December of 2019. Since then, I've had several outages on perfectly clear days, nice weather, no peak load issues, just a terrible distribution system, which is underground in my area. One time, when it happened twice in 24 hours, I went out and talked to the crew, and they said the transformer had a fire in it. I said, how come it caught fire? They said, it's almost 100 years old. So why am I paying these high bills when the distribution grid is in terrible shape? What good does it do for me to have large-scale solar way out there at 3 pennies? What works for me as a customer, again, is by installing solar and pairing it with a battery, I get resilience for my 5 essential circuits. That's what more and more people are doing. And then there is another issue that arises, which is if we have those high retail rates, how do we electrify homes by installing heat pumps? And how do we encourage people to buy an electric car when electricity is so expensive? We have to find a way to lower the cost of electricity at the customer level. And currently, the best option for doing that is either energy efficiency or solar, or possibly both. And then, of course, comes the issue that we saw in California in August of 2020, when we had those large-scale power outages. Since then, there has been a lot of interest in having virtual power plants. Those are all structured around the idea of having solar paired with battery. And I do believe we need large-scale solar. I'm not saying we don't. I believe we need both. We need large-scale as well as small-scale. I do not believe in having a fight between those two. I think that's counterproductive.
Thank you. Severin?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm not saying that wealthy people are stealing from the poor. I'm saying the system is shifting money from the poor to wealthy people. I don't think they're doing it to steal money. In fact, I don't think most of them understand that they are getting a huge subsidy. And I do have to respond to this idea that this is a cost shift that utility shareholders are getting somehow. First of all, utility shareholders do benefit on building transmission, but when we talk about the cost shift from rooftop solar, that is a cost shift that is going on to other ratepayers. That is not something that affects utility profits. Secondly, yes, utilities are big advocates of grid scale solar, but when we talk about this proposed decision and this disagreement, the NRDC, the Utility Reform Network, the CPUC's Public Advocate Office, these are not friends of the utilities, and they are also saying that we need this sort of major change. So this is not just a utility issue. Now, as far as this divide that Sammy pointed out or argued for, I'm not sure I agree that it's a fair characterization. I'm neutral on technology. I want to get the most cost-effective, equitable solution. But right now, we don't have a level playing field between rooftop solar and all the other technologies. Rooftop solar is getting massively larger subsidies. I think we should be subsidizing it. But what I see now is something where we have created huge subsidies that have gone up as rates have gone up. And the industry and the people who benefit from it want to keep those subsidies. And it looks a lot, frankly, like ethanol and biofuels, where we have locked in subsidies, and it turned out the technology has not become as cost effective and environmentally effective as we had hoped. And as a result, we now are stuck with these very large subsidies every year to ethanol producers. So I think that that is where we are. I just want to rebalance the subsidies, and then whichever technology wins. And if rooftop tiles become a great technology, that'll be fabulous, and I'll be all for it. Last thing on resilience. Resilience is great, but it's a private value. When Ahmad gets to keep his air conditioning and television on, good for him, and I have no problem with that. But let's not confuse that with the value that rooftop solar produces for the grid. And that's not a value for the grid. If anything, the dumb solar we're putting in mostly, which is most of the solar without batteries, is actually helping to increase the duck curve and make it harder to balance the grid.
Interesting points. Ahmed, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just comment on the last portion of what Severin was saying. I do see more and more solar customers installing batteries to go along with the solar panels. So we are, I think, moving. I believe the numbers I've seen were 8% a couple of years ago. Now they're up to 13%. I do believe that number is going to rise. And whether resilience is private or public is obviously a subject of conversation. But the people who are putting them in are being motivated by the outages that are happening more and more. And actually, even the utilities are encouraging people. Even the proposed decision is encouraging people to install batteries. The problem is the batteries are so expensive. So we need a subsidy on the battery costs until they come down to make it affordable. I have a lot of friends and neighbors who don't have batteries, that have solar. I've asked them, why didn't you put in a battery? They said it's so expensive. So, right now we have a situation where some subsidies are needed. Again, I actually agree with Severin that on the export side, there's an enormous subsidy that should be phased out. I think on the import side, the subsidy is no different than a subsidy for anything else that helps lower the customer's consumption. That is a subsidy too. So picking on solar for the import subsidy, I think is a little bit, I'm not saying that Severin is doing it, I'm saying many other voices are attacking it both on the import side and the export side. And I'm more inclined to accept that there's a subsidy on the export side, but on the import side, I don't think it's huge. And I honestly haven't dug into the $3 billion number to see all the details. All I can say as an economist, I have seen studies and studies and studies and no agreement.
Very good. Thank you. We did have a question that we asked for time.
Wait, Jeff,
Yeah.
don't I get 1 minute too?
You do.
That
you
is
do.
true. Sorry, Severin.
You
Please,
do.
your response.
Okay, I just want to, I think there is a subsidy on both the imports and the exports. We do have to pay for the grid still. Even Vibrant Clean Energy Study, which was commissioned by the rooftop solar industry, said that we're only going to get 5 to 7% of our electricity in an optimized system from distributed generation. I think that study is flawed and overstates it, but even they agree that most of our power is still going to come from the grid. So we need to pay to upgrade that decrepit grid Ahmad was describing. On batteries, I'll just say, batteries are great, but they're still a private value unless they're part of a virtual power plant. That is, unless they are actually being dispatched by the grid operator or the distribution system operator, then they present real value to the grid.
Well, thank you. And these are definitely complicated questions that may well extend beyond the bounds of the net metering mandate. I thought, given the time that we have, that I might bring up the terms of that mandate real quickly in a question that we weren't sure we would have time for. Assembly Bill 327, passed in 2013, does require the CPUC to meet a number of tests in reforming net metering. Those include assuring that the tariff does achieve a balance of costs and benefits to customers and the electrical system. It also requires that the CPUC include alternatives to encourage growth of distributed energy in disadvantaged communities. It also asks or mandates that customer-sited renewable distributed generation continues to grow sustainably in the state. And I know that the CPUC's guidance throughout this has also been to encourage the growth of energy storage as a necessary kind of add to what solar is doing and the duck curve issues that you talked about. How do you all think the CPUC ought to balance these mandates, some of which may be things that you can do together and others which may be seen as some as potentially in opposition to each other? And Severin, if you wouldn't mind jumping in.
Sure. This just proves that the legislature can write legislation that is internally inconsistent. Basically, they're saying, don't spend any money, but make sure that this industry continues to grow. And I think there's clearly some conflict here in the legislation. And the industry has, under the current subsidies, been growing incredibly rapidly. Now, I think it can continue, but I don't think it can continue to grow that rapidly and still reach an equitable and cost-effective energy transition. So I think we are going to have to make some adjustments. If the legislature really wants that sort of growth to continue, and I hope they won't go this path, they could just, out of the state budget, pay for those subsidies. And I argue, and we have argued in a paper, that moving subsidies onto the state budget is the most obvious and straightforward way to reduce the regressiveness of the current system. And if they want to continue the subsidies for rooftop solar at an outsized level, they can do that in a direct way. I hope they won't, but I think that that is the mandate that some legislators want. Now, let's be clear on why this is happening. It is very easy for the legislature to create mandates and to say, take care of it, CPUC. And then the CPUC is stuck with these conflicting mandates and trying to just control rates. And that's why the rates are so astronomical, which are, as Ahmad pointed out, why so many people are installing solar. But we do have to pay for the grid. We do have to pay for all of these programs that we think are good programs. We won't agree on exactly which programs should be funded, but I think that there is a way out of this I just think that we have to recognize the internal conflict in that law. Frankly, I think the sustainably grow clause is really unfortunate and has really created a lot of problems. And I'm not familiar with any other case where an industry has not just been given a subsidy, but said, and we will mandate that you keep selling more.
Ahmed, what are your thoughts?
So let me first say that even though the subsidy, you could say, is going to the industry, the solar industry, in practice, it is going to the customers who are installing solar. Yes, the industry profits from it too because they're selling more solar. But basically, I think the issue is the cost shift issue that should be concerning the legislature and the PUC. And there are ways to manage it. As I've mentioned earlier, I can come back to those. But let me comment on one aspect of this discussion that I think is really important, which is the low income communities, the low income customers. What can we do for them to engage with them so they are also happier customers because their bills go down and because they contribute to clean energy? I have yet to meet a person, regardless of their income, who doesn't want to have a lower electric bill, number one. Number two, I have yet to meet a person who wants to pollute the planet, perhaps with a few exceptions, whose names appeared earlier in the program, presidential level people. But by and large, every person that I believe is out there in California wants to promote clean energy. Unfortunately, it's expensive. There's no doubt about it. Solar is expensive at the rooftop level. Even leasing is expensive. If your credit qualifications are not there, you will not qualify for the lease. And then there's the question of who makes the payment. So let me just talk briefly about what can we do to address this challenge, which is how do we engage with low-income communities? Now, some of you may have read the op-ed which appeared in the Mercury News a few weeks ago by a reverend of a Catholic church who was talking about how his community is engaging with rooftop solar and they do not like the proposed decision. We are seeing numbers now that more and more low and moderate income customers are reaching out and finding ways to install solar, but it's still a challenge. There's no doubt about it. So how do we promote it? The best way is to do the analogy from energy efficiency. If you're a low income customer, you can weatherize your home. You can upgrade your appliances, courtesy of the utilities funded by other customers. As much as $4,500 a customer in rebates is available. And this is not just in California, by the way, throughout the country. So why can't we come up with a similar rebate program that actually will lower the cost of installing solar for low-income customers? By the way, today there is no rebate. There is no similar rebate for solar panels for any customer. Unlike the energy efficiency air conditioning program that have huge rebates, solar doesn't. So let's do that just for the low-income segment, and we will make it more attractive to them. So that's kind of my general comment. What I would say is this is worthy of a little workshop or conference discussion to see, as Severin said, maybe it's the state legislature that should reach out for this. Maybe the two commissions need to call a webinar or a conference and sort it out. How much of that should be in rates? How much of that should be in taxes? How much of that should come from the huge budget surplus that we now have? Maybe Governor Newsom needs to weigh in on this, how to make solar affordable for low-income customers. I think that has to be addressed.
Thank you. I don't know if you two gentlemen, Severin, I'd certainly offer you a chance to respond.
Well, I was wondering if we're going to get to the next question that we had talked about on low-income customers.
Let's jump ahead if you guys
okay.
are okay with that. Yeah, let's do that because everyone does agree that low-income and disadvantaged customers need to be able to access the benefits of solar, of energy storage, of distributed energy writ large. Everyone is pushing in this state to electrify transport and buildings, and these things are expensive, and it's important to craft policies that will allow lower income and disadvantaged communities to be able to do that and not be stuck with the potential of being, stuck with the excess and growing costs of not being able to make that transition. But there's a lot of disagreement on the best way to make it happen. What mix of policies is best suited to support disadvantaged communities? And what do you make of whether or not the CPUC's proposed decision on net metering will move us toward or away from those goals? And Severin, if you don't mind, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so I don't quite agree with the premise. I think there are real goals that we need to focus on for disadvantaged communities, but the ones that I hear from people in the disadvantaged communities is they want lower rates, reliability, and a clean environment. The idea that we should be putting rooftop solar on is sort of a means, not an end. And the problem is that rooftop solar in low-income communities is not going to get us there. First of all, it's more expensive, much more expensive, as Ahmad said, and that's going to drive up rates. Second of all, what keeps fossil fuel generation alive in these disadvantaged communities is not going to be solved by putting in rooftop solar. It's the hours when the solar isn't producing that keeps those fossil fuels plants running. So more rooftop solar doesn't really solve that problem. Rooftop solar with virtual power plants does help, but that's not the cost-effective way to do it. And so we really need to recognize that what we want to do in disadvantaged communities is clean up the environment, lower their costs, because even with the care discount that Ahmad talked about earlier, that he called a very large discount, even with that discount, low-income customers in California are paying way more than customers in other states in the West and way more than the avoided cost of electricity. So even they are paying an electricity tax. Beyond that, I think it's important to recognize that we're not going to put rooftop solar on most houses in California. Even the Vibrant Clean Energy study doesn't suggest that. And so that means some customers in low-income communities would get rooftop solar and others would get a higher bill. It's sort of like going to a casino where a few people win and everybody else ends up losing. And I don't think that's the way to go. Also, I think this whole idea that people are going to get off the grid or be more resilient or be more protected really has a problem, because when we stop investing in public goods, whether it's schools or healthcare or infrastructure, we know who gets left behind. Wealthy people can provide for themselves. They have the money to do it, and that's what we're seeing. And poor people end up getting lower quality service. In this case, it'll be a lower quality grid, and they end up paying more for it. So I think that this emphasis on putting rooftop solar in disadvantaged communities really is confusing means and goals. The goal should be clean environment, low cost, reliable service. If rooftop solar were the means to do that, I'd be all for it. But at this point with these technologies, it's not. And as a result, we're just going to make the problem worse when we should be focusing on cleaning up the grid as a whole and lowering prices for disadvantaged communities.
Thank you. Ahmed.
Actually, I'm not sure what to say at this point because I already talked about the low income issue earlier. So what I will do is add some commentary to what Severin was saying. First of all, I must say, Severin, the reference to a casino, I found somewhat unfortunate. I think it's a bit of a stretch to compare people putting solar panels to those who are basically winning out on a gamble in a Las Vegas table. I think that may be a bit of a stretch. Maybe it's a Dilbert-like stretch, and that's okay. But I deep down, I personally do not agree with that. What I do agree with you totally, though, is it's a means to an end, and we should look at what are the cost-effective alternatives for low-income communities. You are absolutely right. They're paying much more, despite the care discount. They're paying more than people next door are paying in Arizona or in Nevada. And we need to deal with the rate level issue. I think that'll come up in our last question, perhaps. But what I do want to suggest is right now, the state is taking a very proactive approach through its weatherization programs to help the low-income communities, in addition to the care discount. And all of that is designed to lower their bill. So if that's the focus, is to lower their bill, I'm saying in the menu of options, let's include rooftop solar. And if it makes economic sense, let's do it. If it doesn't make economic sense, let's not do it. It should not be excluded a priori.
Thank you. I do definitely want to get to the last open-ended question, but I certainly want to give both of you a chance to respond to what the others said. Severin.
Well, I'm going to mostly agree with Ahmad. I agree. It should be one of the options we should in the policy debate. But what we're going to find out is rooftop solar is not one of the cost-effective options. And so my reference to the casino is there are going to be a few lucky households who get rooftop solar through some low-income program. But everyone else, and it is going to be the vast majority of low-income customers, are not going to get rooftop solar. They're going to be renters. They don't have houses that can manage rooftop solar. And we're just not going to put in rooftop solar on every possible house. And those people are going to be losers because it's going to drive up their prices.
Okay. No, I think we should get to the final question. We exhausted the conversation on this particular issue.
Well, thank you. I do. It does occur to me that your mention of low-income renters and the like does at least serve as a perhaps an entryway into the final question, which we'd like to treat as a broader discussion. And let's broaden our scope and talk about California electricity rate design and policy in general. Severin, I know that you and your colleagues, Haas, have suggested that today's rate structures are inherently regressive. You know, they put a greater burden on low-income customers, and that there could be some fairly, well, radical, as in changing things from the ground up, ways to deal with that. We've talked about the important role of energy storage paired with solar, and there may well be ways to encourage its adoption both at the customer and utility scale, as well as perhaps in the median at the community level. I believe the Vibrant Clean Energy study did presume solar and storage located more strategically on the distribution grid to lower distribution costs. And of course, we have been talking for quite a while about the need to reform rates to more effectively balance equity of access to the benefits of clean energy with the way in which we seek to balance the costs and benefits to the grid and society at large. And of course, electrification, which is going to require a good amount of electricity at the source and low cost electricity. Let's open it right up and talk about what are some of the ways in which California, the rate design, utility rate design, and California policy ought to be changed to prepare for this future. And Ahmad, if you wouldn't mind taking a first crack at it.
Sure, absolutely. So there are two issues here. One is rate level, and the other is rate design. Rate design can only go so far in lowering the rate level. The problem that California has had for as long as I have lived here, which is since 1974, it has always been a very expensive state for electricity and for everything else. But particularly for electricity, the situation is now out of control. If you look at the E1 tiered rate that PG&E has, it has no time of use, it's just tiers. The first tier begins at 26 cents per kilowatt hour. That's twice the national average of 13 cents. And then it goes higher and higher. That's the lowest you can have is 26. So what can we do here to fix the rate level? That's beyond the scope of this conversation. Obviously, there's a lot that's been written on it. There's cost of service, there's regulation, there's performance-based rate making. There are all of those issues. I will let Severin elaborate on his specific proposal. But before he comes on, I want to make some general comments. As we have been discussing, low-income customers are a priority for the state. They get a 35% discount on their bill. Even then, they are higher. They get free weatherization assistance. Even then, they might be higher. So I'm saying also give them yet another option to consider, which is rooftop solar. Okay? Give them more rebates if needed. As far as all other customers go, I see no reason why every customer should not be required to pay the same minimum bill, let's say $35 a month. There are many customers that I know personally and that I've seen in databases who are paying less than $50 a month, who don't have solar, Some are paying less than $30 a month. Some living in small apartments are paying $25 a month. Let's try to set a minimum bill. Maybe it varies by size of house, or it's based on the connection, as they do in Europe, France, Spain, and Italy being examples. But let's set up some mechanism for recovering these fixed grid costs that Severin and I have been talking about. I totally agree. We have to pay for it. We have to pay for it in an equitable fashion. Number one is the minimum bill. Number two is sharply differentiated, time differentiated rates that encourage, for example, off-peak charging of electric cars, that encourage the installation of heat pumps. But let's not stop there. Let's go to step number three, which is pair them with dynamic pricing for a few days of the year. That's something that Severin and I have a violent agreement upon, going back at least 2 decades, going back to the California energy crisis. You know, what's very awkward and embarrassing for me, and as you know, I have been in this business a long time, we only have 2% of the customers today in California on dynamic pricing. In the business cases for advanced metering infrastructure, and I testified in 2 of the 3 business cases, you needed dynamic pricing to get the demand response benefits, and you needed at least 15% of your customers to be on those rates. Why do we only have 2%? That is something to be looked into. Now, somebody is going to bring up the fact, perhaps on Twitter, oh, we already have time of use rates. They're being rolled out across the state by the investor-owned utilities. Well, they are TOU rates just in name. They are fake TOU rates, if I can use that dreaded term. They are not time of use rates. They will not make a dent in customers' bills or their carbon emissions. And from what I am hearing from my friends and neighbors in this space, people are simply confused and annoyed by these rates. So why are we bothering millions for an opportunity that won't save them anything? It appears to me to be in need of a serious audit, perhaps by the Energy Institute.
Thank you.
Those rates remind me of what happened in the state of Washington in the early 2000s, when one of the utilities rolled out what they said was real-time pricing, and they rolled them out to some 300,000 customers. They were really time of use rates that were very mild. So we need to get serious. I'm out of time. Okay, one closing sentence, if I might. I apologize. Compare our 2% number to Oklahoma's 20% number in dynamic pricing. That should shame us. California needs to be in the lead in rate design. Right now, it's in the lead in the digital capital of the world status, the land of innovation. But in the world of rate design, it's nowhere to be seen, nowhere dignified to be seen. Thank you.
This sounds worthy of a follow-up and perhaps a debate of its own. But Severin, can you tell us about your platonic ideal of rate design, or some of the options that you're looking at?
Well, you're not going to get any disagreement between us on dynamic pricing. I am all in favor of it, and I think there's some ways to go there. But I don't think that's going to solve the problem we're here talking about today. So we started out talking about this monthly grid charge, and I'm not a big fan of it. I think it is a ham-handed approach, but that's because we have this big problem that it's not just the exports that are massively subsidized, it's also the imports. And if people just put a battery behind their meter, they can keep all the power behind the meter and continue to get that big subsidy. I don't think that a minimum bill really solves the problem, certainly not at $35. It wouldn't even come close in terms of revenue generation. And as Ahmad pointed out, the 2 types of people will be hit by it. People with rooftop solar have put in a whole lot of solar, and that's true, and that would be fine. And low-income people who live in small apartments, not all low-income, but disproportionately low-income people who have low bills. So I think there's a better approach, and I've sort of referenced a bit of it. First, move as much of the costs of infrastructure, public policy, special programs, all of the things that the legislature has loaded into rates, move them back onto the state budget. The state budget is a far more progressive way to finance these costs, and it would help to lower the rates. And if we're going to electrify, if we're going to make space heating and water heating and electric vehicles really attractive, we're going to have much, much lower rates. So get those programs out of bills and put them onto the state budget, where we pay for them through state income taxes and state sales taxes. To the extent that we can't put it all on the state budget, and I think there's no way the legislature would accept it, do it with fixed monthly charges. This only works for residential. This does not solve the commercial industrial issue, but we're here talking about residential rooftop. Do it with fixed monthly charges. I would prefer to make those fixed monthly charges progressive, to make them income-based. But I will point out that we are now at the point, there's so much rooftop solar among wealthy customers now, that the net consumption from the grid by customers is about the same for wealthy customers as for poorer customers. That didn't used to be the case at all, but now we are at a point where there isn't that much difference. But if we make those fixed charges income-based, we can actually make this progressive and not put an undue burden on low income. And then, finally, I'll just say, here's a fundamental philosophy of this. Nobody should pay less than the burden they impose on the system. But if everybody just pays the burden they impose on the system, that still leaves a lot of residual costs that have to be recovered. Right now, we are recovering those through the most regressive tax you could imagine, by just raising the price of volumetric electricity. What we could do is move those into other tax sources and have a much better outcome than we have right now.
Thank you. These are all fascinating and worthy topics of discussion. Not within the CPUC's power to put into effect, of course, and certainly in the few minutes remaining, I wanted to give each of you just a short moment, a minute or so, to summarize, if you care to, the key points you wish to leave our audience with as it pertains to the net metering decision now before the CPUC. Severin, if you wouldn't mind taking first shot.
Oh, okay. So I have nothing against rooftop solar. I have friends with rooftop.
Sorry, Severin, I hate to interrupt you, but I've been reminded by the folks who pay my salary that it's very important that we allow the audience to take a shot at a poll that we've prepared. And we'd like to invite our audience to respond to this poll to find out what you think about these issues. You should all see it pop up on your screens now as we allow Severin and Ahmed to make their closing statements.
Okay, I'm sorry we're doing that. I don't think this was a boxing match, but there you go. You can't have everything you want. I think rooftop solar is a fine technology. My views on all of the technologies have changed over time as those technologies have evolved. I think we want to keep rooftop solar in the mix. We want to appropriately subsidize it to reflect its value. And I think the redesign of rates is necessary to do that. We are on a path to doing that right now with the proposed decision and to improving equity. So by and large, I think the proposed decision is the best way to go until we can actually change rates. And when we can actually change rates, then we can just stop arguing about net energy metering. If the cost of volumetric electricity were actually reflecting avoided cost, and we were paying these other costs through something less regressive than an additional tax on electricity, then I think we could stop arguing about net metering and just let people be producers and consumers.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ahmed.
So I think the proposed decision is a horrible mistake. It should be thrown out, and the commission needs to start from scratch. Look at time varying rates, look at minimum bill on the import side, and lower compensation on the export side. Just totally get rid of that grid access charge. It's insufferable. And also get rid of the retroactive adjustment. California wants to promote clean energy. It wants to decarbonize the state. If this decision is approved, we will look really bad on the global scale based on all the contexts that I have. So I think it's with an embarrassment. I hope we get over it. Otherwise, it'll be a terrible mark on our report card.
Thank you very much, Ahmad. And thank you both for a great discussion. And thank you all in our audience for joining. We appreciate your attendance. We'd like to invite you to continue following this issue and other topics related to clean energy. You can do so, of course, by subscribing to the Canary Media newsletter, which you'll see an invitation for shortly. We also wanted to let you all know that the debate you've just watched will be available for replay shortly. You'll get an email notification when that video is ready, and we will also be publishing written highlights soon. Visit canarymedia.com to find them. And please join me all in thanking once again our esteemed panelists, debaters, and conversation partners, Ahmad, Faruqui, and Severin Borenstein. Thank you both very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Severin. I enjoyed it very much. Hope we'll get to have lunch one of these days.
Yes, I do too, Ahmad. Take care.
All right. Bye. Thank you, Jeff.
Bye.
Thank you all, and have a good day.
Thank you.